After all the drama, football legend and BBC's highest paid presenter Gary Lineker has said that he will return to his old position. He's getting back to the BBC. Now, this comes after a flashy row between the BBC and the football presenter. Lineker tweeted that he is expecting to get back to the Match of the Day show on Saturday. He also thanked his colleagues back at BBC Sport. Ending his Twitter thread, Lineker said, "We remain a country of predominantly tolerant, welcoming and generous people." BBC chief said they are announcing a review led by an independent expert on its existing social media guidance, with a particular focus on how it applies to freelancers outside news and current affairs. However, he also added the current guidelines stay in place. Now, on Saturday, BBC was forced to cancel much of its sports coverage as presenters refused to work in order to show solidarity with Lineker. Lineker was suspended from his role after he compared the new UK law for illegal migrants to Nazi-era Germany. For more on this, Adam Schwartz, writer and political commentator, joins us live from London. Welcome to WION, Adam.
Good to be with you.
Adam, what really happened? Did the BBC buckle under pressure?
I think really that's the only way this can be interpreted. I just watched BBC Director General Tim Davie gave an interview on the statement that was released about an hour and a half ago, and he really emphasised sort of two outcomes that he's brought forward to try to bring this drama to a close. The first is that Gary Lineker, he says, will agree now to abide by the BBC's impartiality rules. Well, if you look at what Gary Lineker has been saying over the last few days, in fact, as far as he's concerned, actually he hasn't breached the BBC's impartiality rules at all. And we know that actually Davie had asked Gary Lineker at the beginning of this drama if he would try to tone down some of his political tweeting, which we know Gary Lineker refused. So clearly on that one specific point, the BBC has sort of conceded to Lineker. And secondly, Davie announced that the BBC would be launching a review, an independent investigation or review into its social media guidelines and how exactly the BBC's impartiality rules sort of fits into that. And I think ultimately that's a very good thing. I think this sort of scandal has highlighted the weakness in the kind of ambiguity of those rules. But again, I think it sort of indicates a climb down from the BBC in that it's kind of acknowledging that they are actually not really fit for purpose. So I think on both of those points, really, this is a huge climb down from the BBC. But clearly, this crisis does seem to be coming to an end. But I think it really has sort of shone a light on a whole range of different issues really related to the BBC. I think all of the drama and the tension that we've seen over the last few days is really a product of what happens when you see an institution of what is meant to be impartial actually politicized. And I think ultimately, when you have a government that is trying to exert influence over a media body, ultimately that body does start to try to sort of mimic the government in that sense. And I think that, the way that we've seen this U-turn happen has actually been quite similar to the way that we've seen other government U-turns by the Conservative government over the last few years. But I think, it's quite important to try to sort of maintain perspective on all of this. We're now onto our fourth day of what is a story about a sports commentator's political views being in the headlines, when in fact we only had one day or even less than one day when we were actually talking about the substance of the migration and the refugee issues. Right. I think it's so important just to return, to those fundamental issues which ultimately are much more important to society.
Adam, what happens to the BBC going forward? They've long been known for their stance, which mostly leans towards the government, if I were to put it just that way. But here there seems to be a complete shift due to internal pressures. Going forward, do you feel there's going to be a change in the way BBC functions?
I think ultimately there has to be a change in the way that it functions. I think that, there obviously has been criticism, it's fair to say from both sides of the political spectrum in recent years about, what exactly the BBC's role is and how it should be impartial. But I think, really, since I've been following BBC affairs for about 15 years, this drama, more than any other story that we've seen over a long time, has really shown, kind of an unsustainability to the way that the BBC is currently working. And I think one of the major problems of of the BBC is that it is quite vulnerable in the way that its leadership structure is appointed to governments that actually want to try to exert influence over it. Because ultimately, the leaders of the BBC, the BBC chairman, is ultimately appointed by the government, and so ultimately, that's a situation that clearly has not boded well for this situation. I mean, current BBC chairman Richard Sharp, who is currently under his own investigation about his own ties to the government and his appropriateness in the role, has been completely absent from TV screens over the past few days, because actually he's not really viewed as a credible person to go in and defend the BBC's impartiality. So clearly, both the kind of structure of the BBC and its current leadership, it's not working in a way that ultimately fulfills the BBC's purpose. But I think we might see a change of government over the next few years from Conservative to the Labour Party. So I would hope that the Labour Party would bring forward some kind of reforms to make sure that it's not just viewed as their turn to try to sort of influence the BBC, but in fact that we have a proper system that actually enables impartiality to return to the BBC. Because I think ultimately, the BBC, used to be one of the UK's best sort of exports, and I think it really needs to return to that to ensure that it maintains credibility as an institution.
Adam, there's one more thing that you mentioned earlier, that that most of the focus has shifted onto what Gary Lineker said, but what he was talking about, the migration bill, illegal migration bill, what about that? Do you feel there will be more focus on that going forward, or any changes to the bill?
Well, I would hope that now that this drama over Gary Lineker is coming to an end, that actually we would return to talking about the substance of the policies contained within the migration bill. So I think there certainly will be more scrutiny on that, particularly as it actually comes towards Parliament to be debated. And I think we are going to see a huge amount of drama around that particular bill. Ultimately the bill will be passed because the Conservative government does have a large majority in Parliament. But there are a whole host of different issues to do with the bill, to do with its morality, to do with its legality, which actually means that, even if it is passed, it's not going to be able to be implemented in the way that the government wants to for a long time, because ultimately we know that there are going to be a lot of legal challenges to the bill, and quite rightly, because clearly the bill in its current form does not meet the standards set out in both UK law and international law. So I think clearly, we haven't seen the end of the issues and the kind of drama around this particular bill in its own right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining in, Adam.
Good to be with you.